Two big changes Temple Rhodes is making in 2025 that you might just decide you should do on your farm. We're talking about fertility and changing up his whole planting methodology. We're going to cover that in this episode of XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve.
Welcome to XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve podcast, where real farmers share real insights and real results to help you improve your farming operation. And now, here's your host, Damian Mason.
Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve. I got Temple Rhodes coming in from the cold. I'm recording this in January, and it is an absolute cold time, most of the entire country. Hell, they're getting snow in New Orleans today. So anyway, he's in from the cold, taking a break, and I said, you know what, let's hop on here and do your recording. What couple things are you going to change in 2025? He says, I'm going to change my in-furrow practices. I'm going to change a lot my fertility practices. He's going to tell us why he's changing them and the objective he hopes to attain, and more importantly, why you might consider doing the same thing on your farm. All right, in furrow. It was just a couple months ago we talked about the other thing. You know, like Johnny Varell last year took the 2x2 off of his planter. There's some new technology. You can change up your in furrow. You're going to make some changes in your in furrow and how you go about planting.
Yeah, I mean, so what we found out like last year, you know, we really put it to the test last year. We got to a point where we said, hey, look, we need to do a better job of managing our finances, really. So we were putting a lot of our products down up front. You know, I had a heavy load in furrow. I had a heavy load in my 2x2. We were spreading fertility, you know, on the whole acre. When I say the whole acre, not just under the row. We were doing some strip tillage as well, but we were spreading the whole farm with dry fertility. I mean, what do you call it? Just fling it out there. And what you say all the time, Damian, you just fling it out there.
Fling it out there.
So, I mean, we were, yeah, fling it out there. That's what Damian always said. Oh, you just fling it out there. So we're changing up that. So last year, what we did was we cut way back on our fertility plans, and we're going to do some more of the same things this year. We just kind of took it to a test last year. We found out that it really worked. We're going to put, you know, remember what we always talk about? We always talk about if you can get right in front of those windows of opportunity, and you look at, you know, one of our great sponsors, Nature's, you know, I've looked at some of the things that they've done in the past. They've got this neat little piece of information that you can look at, and it'll tell you what that crop needs at what stage it needs. So I kind of followed it last year and kind of fine-tuned some stuff. So what we did is we figured, you know, what do I need at the beginning stages of a corn plant? Let's just use corn, for instance. You know, I know that from emergence to, you know, V4, V5, it's determining the rows around. So I don't need any more fertility on my plant than just that. So we tried to fine tune that. And I think that we're closer now. I don't think that I was perfect last year. I think that I'm closer. So we're going to fine tune that, and we're going to get right in front of that window. And then we know that from V6 to, let's call it V8, V10, we might need something else. So we're going to get in front of each one of those windows, but we're not going to treat the whole acre, and we're not going to go out there and just fling it out there. And we're not going to do it all ahead of time, you know. So my in-furrow program last year, the one that made the most ROI was, you know, having a hopper box treatment. Now, it had some things in it, like, you know, terracin was one of the things that was in that hopper box treatment, and it created this huge, massive root structure. And I was like really impressed with it. You know, you came out and looked at it, and we did a bunch of talks on it, and I was impressed with the root structure. But one of the things that it showed me was the nitrogen that I was putting down in front. You know, I was strip tilling my anhydrous. One of the things that I learned from having that hopper box treatment in there and having terracin in there, it created this massive root mass. Well, it also sucked up a lot of the nitrogen that I was leaving there for later on. Yep. So what we ended up finding out, we found out that we had dip back into plants. Now, the biomass that was generated from it, that early nitrogen, was massive. So for a guy that was like, let's say a silage guy, man, it was massive. I mean, it was 30% more plant biomass in that plant. But and now it did give me, you know, I think it was like a 8 or 11 bushel increase in at the end, you know, on my yield. But like, I feel like I left so much on the table because it created something I wasn't ready for because I put a lot of that nitrogen down up front in a strip till. So I'm like, okay, lesson well learned. I don't put as much nitrogen down up front. We need to spoon feed that nitrogen. So we're learning how to spoon feed the entire crop. So from the in-furrow to the strip till to foliar nutrition, all of these things, what I'm learning is if you can just get inside that, just in front of those windows of opportunity and have it there for when it's going to need it later on, that's massive.
So one of the things you said a lot of stuff there. So let's go and unpack it, which is what corporate people talk now about unpacking. First off, flinging, yeah, it's one of my words, but there was this idea, you're mining that soil and soil testing and all that. And just since I started working with XtremeAg, we've gotten smarter. It seems like the whole industry has no, we're not mining the soil. We just know that nutrient that's 15 inches away from the seedling isn't doing you any good. That nutrient that's 15 inches in the middle of the row, that seed can't get it. So when you're talking about putting it where it needs to be in furrow technology or using like a hopper throttle from Meristem or whatever those things are, it's not that you're depleting the soil. Hell, that soil wasn't doing anything for that plant anyhow, at least for the first month of its, from the time it goes in the ground and sprouts until its first month.
I mean, think about all the technology that we have nowadays. Like just take it back as simple as auto steer. We got everybody's got RTK, and everybody is sub-inch technology. We can on the exact same row. We can follow pass to pass.
Yep.
We can do all those things. We have a really good way of doing this and making it capable for everybody to do it. Why are we fertilizing in between the rows the same amount that we can fertilize underneath that plant? If we can fertilize just underneath that plant, think about the amount of fertility that we can cut back because we're throwing 100% out of it out there and we're only capitalizing on 30% that's underneath the row. So what are we doing? I don't think that if for any one reason that we're mining the soil, to be truthful, we've cut back on fertility the past few years because of economy's made us do that, right? Our inputs have gotten so high. So we've done that and we haven't seen any changes in any of our soil samples. We take soil samples twice a year and we haven't seen any of that. What we're seeing more of with the use of biology and adding other things out there, breaking down our stover. There's a tremendous amount of fertility that's left out there in our stover every year. In a 200 some bushel corn crop, you might have 60 pounds of phosphorus and 80 pounds of potassium out there, but if it's not broke down, what good is it? All these years that they talked about cover crops, putting out a cover crop, and that's a great thing. Don't get me wrong. I know that you did a podcast with Kelly about cover crops, and it's a tremendous value, but cover crops alone aren't enough. They're just not enough. And I'll take it back to a simple version. So over the past 25 odd years, the state of Maryland has been incentivized to plant cover crops, and we've done it on 100% of our acres. We have been implemented to do nutrient management in our area for the last 20 some years, and we've got history of taking soil samples every year for the last 25 odd years. Well, in 25 odd years, out of the first 20 or so, our CECs or organic matter has never changed. We've never changed any of that, and that's adding soil health and you're making a better soil type, all of that stuff. Well, we've never changed any of that. Well, guess what? In the last 4 or 5 years where biology has become a major player in the game. It's kind of the wild, wild west out there with some of the biology, but we're getting it fine-tuned now and breaking down stover, getting it back in the ground. All these things that we're implementing now all of a sudden in the last 4 or 5 years, our needle was moved on our CECs and our organic matter, where before we never made any difference. Over the first 20 years that we were doing it, we never made any difference. Not even a little tiny tick. You couldn't see any difference. Now we're seeing differences. So we're learning a lot and we're gaining a ton of ground. And it's tremendous to see that it feels like now all these efforts are paid off because we're feeding the natural biology that's out there with humics and fulvics and sugars and all these things and adding biology. Like all of this is starting to make a difference at this point. And that's adding soil health. So as long as we're keeping our soil healthy, we're not going to mine our soils. We just have to find a way to unlock some of the things that are in our soils. That's our biggest problem. We know that we've got fertility in our soils, but without adding fertilizer, we can't seem to get the crop out of it, right?
Hey, I got to throw it out there, by the way.
Okay.
You almost inadvertently discouraged people from doing a bunch of these practices because you said it took 30 years. And there's going to be a bunch of people that say they're my age and your age and say, well, they let me start this now. I'm in my mid-50s. Why in the hell do I care when I'm in my mid-50s to do something? There was a payoff sooner for some of those things. First off, cutting back nutrients. The first payoff was you're allowed to still farm because where you were, if you didn't cut back nutrients, have a nutrient management plan, you're going to be put out of business or fined or punished because of the regulation. So there's one benefit. The second benefit is you saw some big fertility or, like you said, some organic matter movements, and it took a while for that. But I'm guessing you saw some better retention of moisture. I'm guessing you saw some other biological activity we weren't even really measuring back 30 years ago. I'm guessing that within a year or two, you saw some tangible results. Not massive, but I'm guessing you saw some.
We saw all those things. I mean, you're talking about, soil retention. You're talking about whatever nutrition that you put out there that was left over from your other crop that wasn't run in the bay. You could utilize that. And being that we had to cut back on fertility, keep in mind, they were cutting us back on our phosphorus and on our nitrogen. So anytime that we can recapture that, keep it in a green root, keep it growing, and then save that to our next crop. Those are the things that saved us. So yes, we weren't changing our organic matter or our CECs, but the bonus, you're exactly right, Damian, the bonus that we had on the backside of retaining some of that fertility, getting it back into our new plant that we're growing the next season, that was huge benefits, because I don't know that we could have had a nutrient management practice like what was implemented without having a cover crop program. I think that it would be almost impossible, in my opinion.
I had Kevin on, and the changes he's making in 2025, he's going back to doing some early season or even fall applied dry, because he said, I've got some deficiencies, and not on every acre. So that's one of his big changes. You're kind of going the other way. I could argue it could be soil type. It could also be climate, where he's got some different challenges, because you did a field trial with one of our business partners and Nature's, and also with AgroLiquid, and you talked a great length about maybe you could go 20% less fertility spend, and just timing of application absolutely does not sacrifice yield. We covered that, by the way. We covered that, by the way, if you're listening. We covered that in a field day recording, so go back and listen to it, because it was in August at his farm, at Temple's farm, where we did a big recording about this. Go check it out.
Yeah, we've shown that where you can actually cut fertility back 20-25%. I mean, even as massive as 30%. I mean, I've been in the strip till game for, holy moly, 15, 18 years. And one of our first things that we did, all them years ago, was we had a true NPK program, and we put everything down up front. Never went back in and side dressed. We didn't know anything about foliar nutrition. We didn't know anything, but we knew that we could cut back on our fertility by 30% and still come up with the same yield. That was what we were thinking. And we proved that, that was 20-some years ago that we proved that. So we know that works. Where we're benefiting now is the fact that we can get on foliar nutrition throughout the season and get the plant exactly what it wants. I mean, just for the mainstay of what we talked about last year, with you and I talked about, being able to juggle your finances according to the weather is a major play. When you put it all out up front, you're stuck to that number. You're not getting away from that number whatsoever.
I wrote down my Post-it notes here before we hit record, and one of the things, besides fertility changes for budget, which is clearly important in 2025, the other reason is just regulatory. Everybody's going to end up, we think, you and I both think that everybody in the United States in the business of agriculture is going to start having more scrutiny about their applied nutrients because, we've talked about it, Des Moines River watershed.
Regardless of what watershed they might be near or what aquifer they might be near, it's all coming. I mean, it's 100% coming. I mean, take this for instance. So Johnny and I have had multiple conversations about irrigation, right? And we both agreed that the first years that we put in irrigation was always the most valuable time, the biggest return on our investment. And then all of a sudden it dwindles down and dwindles down. It seems like our water quality is getting worse. This is even irrigation. We think the bicarbonates that we're putting out there with some of our fertility that we're putting out there is leaching through and is getting into our aquifer, and we're sucking that back up and putting it back on the crop. So a lot of these high salt indexes, some of the stuff that's got, like KCl, it's got chloride in it, all of these things, we think that some of that might be stemming through and getting into some of our water quality. So it's a multitude of different things. I mean, our minds are racing a million miles an hour to try to figure out why some of these things are happening, but it's a struggle everywhere. And regardless of how safe we think a product is, if you're not putting it right there where the plant's going to use it up and you're fertilizing every acre, there is an opportunity for that to get into a water source of some type if it's not sucked up by a crop.
Speaking of water sources and Temple Rhodes, he and I, if you're listening to this before February 19th, we're going to be in western Nebraska, in Gering, Nebraska, doing a talk to a couple hundred producers, we hope more than that, about this very topic, because he's got 30 years of experience with water next to the field and a pretty heavy dose of regulation. Nutrient management plans are going to be a requirement. I'm convinced to get crop insurance or participate in USDA programs, which you probably need to be, you're going to end up having to have nutrient management plans. You talk about the Des Moines River watershed. You're not even talking about, Simple's out in the East Coast where they're anti-agriculture. That's not necessarily true. That's what a lot of people think. It's happening in Nebraska. It's happening in Iowa. It's happening in North Ohio, not too far from my farm. This started 20 years ago with algae blooms in the Lake Erie because of phosphorus overuse and overapplication. This is a big deal. We're going to be talking about it February 19th in Gering, Nebraska, for a great group of people there, because this is what we do. We go around and help people adjust and succeed. While we're talking about fertility, I also want to talk to you about our friends at Nature's. Nature's is one of our business partners here at Cutting the Curve. And you know what? They also were our first sponsor with our new show called The Grain. I encourage you to check that out. Go to XtremeAg.farm. Anyway, Nature's produces high-quality liquid fertility products powered by Nature's BioK. Can target specific periods of influence, like Temple's talking about, throughout the growing season via precision placement techniques. As Temple said, you've got tools at your disposal to get this fertility where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. It's not like the 1960s and 70s where we're just going out and flinging stuff around. So use this product to mitigate plant stress, enhance crop yield, and most importantly, boost your farm's ROI. Go to natures.com to learn more. All right. You talked about salt. That's another one. You said bicarbonates. This thing that we're starting to get smarter about is like, wait a minute. How did we?
I don't know if we're getting smarter. We're getting dangerous, is what it really is. I mean, we're trying to get smarter, but we sure as hell, it seems like we're getting very dangerous to ourselves. Every time that we think that we got something figured out, it feels like sometimes we ain't got nothing figured out. But the salt loads on the fields are becoming to a point that we think that it's really affecting the biology out there. And that's become a problem, because every time that we affect the biology, and it doesn't matter what we do, you can throw a salt load out there on the field and it can affect the biology. We can throw a heavy fungicide treatment out there. It can affect the biology. There's a lot of things that we do. I mean, and I've told you before, we inject anhydrous, so does Kelly. And that straight up kills biology. All of these things that we're doing affect the biology, and we're affecting ourselves. And the more that we learn that we need to back up on some of these things, we are doing some type of harm. Now, the trick is figuring out how to get what we need out there with the tools that we have. Is there some way to buffer some of that load? Is there some way to handle it? These are all things that we haven't quite figured out yet. But like I said, the technology that we've come upon, think about this. When we go out there, I'm going to use your term one more time, flinging it out there. Maybe we should rename this thing, whether to fling or not to fling. Maybe that's the name of our podcast. Like it. But when you, excuse me, yeah. So when you put that out there on the ground, it doesn't matter what fertility is. Whether it's NP or K, it's only going to move down through the soil profile, but you're putting it on the top of the ground and you're not actually incorporating it in the ground where the plant can actually utilize it. Roots go down. They don't lay on top of the ground. They're not going to get it all. Phosphorus, for instance, they say phosphorus doesn't move more than, like a eighth of an inch in 6 months or something like that. So you're putting it on top of the ground and then you're expecting the plant to get it. Well, the roots don't grow up, they grow down. So all of these things play a major effect into that, and so then you think about it like this, so I've thrown all this salt all over the ground. I don't have a way for it to take, the plant can't really take it up. So, I mean, we're creating our own problems, but when you look at some low salt stuff, some of the foliar nutrition that we're using, it's extremely low salt. Well, that low salt never even touches the ground. It only touches the plant where the plant can utilize it and it can pull it up. And it has the technology to suck it right up. One of the really, really high salt ones is potassium, and we're throwing potassium chloride out there or potassium sulfate, whatever it may be. You're throwing that out there. It's a high salt load. When you can use something that's lower salt, you can use potassium acetate, BioK from Nature's, for instance, and you can put it on the plant and it's like a 10x rate. The plant can utilize it right away. It's not getting into the soil profile. All of these things play a major part of it, and we showed it last year by growing these crops, and I had it in irrigated and I had it in dry land. And the fact of the matter is, if it wasn't for the fact that I did it on majority of my dry land last year, and instead of doing my old method of we'd spread a bunch of fertility up front and then we might work it in the ground, but most of the time it's mostly no-till. So your quote, flinging it, I saved that money and then I fed the crop all throughout the year. And a lot of times it was anywhere between $80 to $100 an acre savings of me spoon feeding that crop versus the other way. And it allowed me to, hey, look, the weather is doing X, Y, or Z. I can either add or I can take away, where before it was, man, you better be doing some serious praying, because if not, you're in a bad way.
Okay, so I said when we're going through asking all the guys, and I've got Kelly, Kevin, Sam, Temple, and I'm gonna still got a couple to record, but we're doing all this about changes for 2025. Always think like the person that's listening to this says, well, it's easy for Temple to say he's got all those acres and he's got his kids helping him, he's got this equipment. You don't have to have a bunch of equipment. You just talked about you're going to use a Meristem hopper throttle. If you don't have in-furrow technology on your planter, you still can do this. You can use products that just get dumped on your seed. And essentially, yep. Johnny Varell once said, he's like, that's the easiest adjustment you can make. You don't have to have a bunch of money and have in your equipment and in-furrow technology, because these products now basically make up for that.
Yeah, I mean, the technology and what we already have, I already have an in-furrow program. And I had it and I used it very differently than what I'm going to utilize it now. I'm going to cut back on some things and add some things, and I'm fine tuning my in-furrow. I'm fine tuning my tuba 2. Before my tuba 2 was it was a high phosphorus program in my tuba 2. I've stopped doing that now because I've realized that I don't need all that phosphorus at that point. I need the phosphorus to drag out to the end. So I changed that, and I can accommodate that by using it as foliar nutrition in the end. I don't need to put that huge slug up front, because majority of the phosphorus, like 67% of the phosphorus usage in a corn plant, is in reproduction, not in vegetation. So right. I don't want to grow a lot of vegetation. I sell seed. I don't sell biomass. Right. Yeah. So we've learned all these things. So by adapting and just changing, I mean, I already have a sprayer. Most guys, a lot of people do. I'm not saying all of them do, but even if they don't have a sprayer, they have a sprayer company, the application company that comes out and does it for them. So just change what you're putting on. Instead of putting on just straight herbicide, maybe there's an application that you can make in there and take it out of the front end. You're just, what does Chad say? Reallocating. You're not changing your program. Your total plant nutrition program is going to be very similar. It's not going to change a lot. You're just reallocating.
What you just talked about, just fertility can go a lot of different places. It's not competitive or antagonistic to have a fertility in with a herbicide sprayer pass, is it? I mean, there's no, it doesn't like degrade the effectiveness of herbicide. So you can do it on fertility. You can do fertility then. You can do fertility in furrow. You can do fertility even in a hopper application on the seed. You can do fertility as foliar. So
on your hopper seed thing, you're getting something different. You're getting a terracin product. You're getting a little bit of biology that you're putting out there that will help you do some stuff.
Stress reduction.
You're getting
usually there's something to reduce stress at the cold soil.
I mean, and what we found out with our hopper box treatments, there's multiple ones that you can use out there. But in our hopper box treatments, what we found is we got, plain and simply, we got a better stand. And what we're figuring out is everybody, like, let's just use soybeans, for instance. Everybody's like, oh, if you plant early beans, you got to treat them. They have to be treated, which the treatment is fungicide, insecticide. Well, in the hopper box treatments now, if you really want them, you can get the fungicide, insecticide in there, or you can use it through your in furrow. So, I've changed up a lot of things, and I found out that in a lot of cases, we would get our seed treated, fungicide, insecticide, and then in my in furrow treatment, I'd have fungicide, insecticide. So I'm doubling up on my fungicide, insecticide. Well, what does fungicide do when you put it in the soil? Yes, it protects the seed. Yes, it protects the plant from diseases. It also can have a tendency, it might kill some biology. Well, we don't really want some of these things to happen. So I don't need to double up on some of those things. It's time to, and these new modern day farming, we need to figure out how to cut back. But what we found in the hopper box treatments is we were getting an all around better stand. Our stand out there in our population, our final stands were always better. So it was enlightening to me to see that in beans and in corn. So,
by the way, you said there's something we never even knew about, and I try to always be a student here and learn as much or more than the people listening to this. We never talked about fungi to bacteria ratios in our soil. I never even heard that until the year 2024, where, first off, I don't think we ever measured it. I'm sure we ever knew that much about it or cared, and we certainly never had an ability to measure it. And we just started talking about that last year. Overutilization of fungicide applications has killed the hell out of the fungi in the soil, which is a beneficial thing, and racked up a margin. It's wreaked havoc. It's made it so that, like Kelly talked about, like 1,700 to 1 bacteria to fungi, and you're supposed to be closer to 1 to 1. That's a new thing where what you're talking about, we've been mostly talking about fertility, but you're just talking about, this is not only smart to do, it saves you money. If you could just cut back on double application of fungicide.
Yeah. They talked about that at Johnny's field day. He was talking about burying like white T-shirts in the soil and talking about using different things and he was measuring, it was just it's a visual kind of measuring bacteria to fungi is what it really was. And when he was talking about, they were talking about actually spreading, dry fertility that actually kills some of the bacteria and fungi because what's in it, whether it was the chloride that was in it or whether it was the salt load was in it. Those are questions I can't answer. Brewer was the one that gave the talk down there at Johnny's field day, but that was enlightening to me when we were actually doing that much damage to our soil. And exactly right. That fungi to bacteria ratio needs to be closer to 1 to 1. And I can't remember what Kelly was the one that's expert on this. But when you talk to Kelly about it, like his ratios in his soil were like crazy imbalanced. And when we talk about putting fungicides on a plant, and make a plant healthy. And believe me, I am one of the strongest advocates for fungicide that you'll ever see. Over application of fungicide, I'm not. I mean, I'm just not. But again, that's not getting into your soil profile, and you're not. Again, think about treating every acre. Whether you get it, if you get fungicide just in the furrow, you're treating that small little space where you're not treating the whole entire dirt profile. Like, I mean, all of these things make a difference.
Yep. One of the things I'm going to go through is, I said we're asking a lot of the same questions to the guys about changes in 2025. What's the objective? I think I can pretty well summarize. You're going to try and reduce your spend, or at least keep the spend the same, and have bigger. It's either same yield, reduce spend, or bigger yield, same spend. And so, what is your thought? Which one do you get?
I think that, I'm reducing spend, and I'm going to come up with the exact same yield. I've proved it that it doesn't make a difference one way or the other. Really, what it is, it's about it's fine tuning our finances is really what it is, according to the weather that permits us to spend what we need to spend.
Mm-hmm. And then the other one, I think we can make a pretty strong case and objective is probably soil health. Because over application, as you said, first off, it doesn't get utilized by the plant. And so if you think you're building up a bank in the soil, there's an argument made for that. But we're largely learning that building up the soil bank, it's with applied synthetic fertility, it's almost not real.
Well, I mean, we can talk about building up the soil bank, but one, I don't feel like we really need to build up the soil bank. The soil is what it is right now. Like God made it what it is, and we're trying to maintain it. As long as we put back whatever that crop took off, yeah. I don't know that you need to build it. And you only, when you're in a nutrient management, place like I am, you learn that you can get away with year after year growing that crop and not worried about what is in the soil or anything else. You can worry about what's in that crop. And do we have unbalanced soil types? Sure, everybody has unbalanced soil. I don't care what, you can think that you have the most balanced soil in the world, and you realistically don't. You have to unlock what's in it, first of all. You have to grow the crop and know what that crop's requirements are, or none of it doesn't matter.
The person that's going to try and make some of these similar changes, I guess, I think the recommendation is pretty easy. Again, we already said you don't have to have you don't have to go out and change your lineup of equipment. You can use stuff that's goes in. I mean, it's other than maybe they'd say, well, I don't have Y drop. That'd be the only thing.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a custom application company, whether they have Y drop or not. I mean, there's other ways to get fertility on besides just going out there with Y drop. I'd start somewhere. You already have a system in place, I'm sure, whether it's 2x2, in furrow. I mean, the hopper box treatment is an easy place to really start. I mean, I've seen scenarios where I turn my in furrow completely off, and just run the hopper box treatments, same yield. So, I mean, there's more studies to be done for me. I just think that with what I'm trying to do, I have to have that slug of fertility right there at the seed through, the nature's blend that I have that I'm running in furrow across my grower standard practice. I have to have that because of my inherent condition. So not everybody needs to have that. A lot of people can get away with just straight hopper box treatment and then let it go to that next pass. But you can put it on. I mean, there's guys out here that, for their side dress pass, instead of putting on, Y drop, and they're spreading fertility over the top, and they seem to manage it just fine. And then they'll water it in. There's multiple ways to accommodate it. I mean, Matt flies on urea sometimes for a side dress pass. So it just depends on what you want to do. But just say if your conditions are burning up, and at least you take you have the ability to say, man, it's droughty, it's bad, there's no rain in the forecast.
Yeah, you just
skip that pass.
Abort and say, okay, I'm done.
Exactly. You have that ability to do that. Where before you don't have that ability to do that, because once it's out there on the dirt, it's yours.
Go and listen to the episode that he and I did, Temple and I did at his field day last August. It's out there, and it's all about he completely revamped and changed up for a plot, and it turns out it did just great. It made bigger yield and spent less money on it. You can do the same. That's why we're here to help you at Extreme Ag. Also, we've got field days. All the field days are scheduled for 2025, and one of them, in fact, the last one of the season, is at Chestnut Manor Farm. All the farm, by the way, if you've never been to Maryland agriculture, Eastern Shore, go across the bay and all this from Baltimore, all the farms have names, and a bunch of them have pictures of like ducks, because you know what? They used to try and tell you that the Chesapeake Bay was getting polluted by all the chicken farms. I think it's because of all the waterfowl. That's why Temple shoots them, because they're shitting everywhere. So it's important.
Exactly.
It's important that you go out there and shoot those geese and ducks. Anyway, all the farms in Eastern Maryland have farm names. His is Chestnut Manor Farms. There's no ducks or geese, I don't think, in their farm logo, but most of them do have that. Anyway.
There is in mine. There's a goose logo in mine.
There is a goose. All right. Yeah, that's right.
There is a goose.
It's in Centerville, Maryland, and it's going to be on August 21st. We encourage you and invite you to come to any and all of our field days. You'll see plots. You'll talk to our business partners about products, about practices. You'll see equipment. You'll see people that you can learn from. That's why we're there. We do these. They start in May 22nd. It's our first field day at Chad Henderson's. That's one of the Sendit twins with Temple. And then we wrap up our last field days August 21st, and a whole bunch of field days in between. So I encourage you to check it out. We'll be putting this up at XtremeAg.farm, and it's always a lot of fun. So anyway, till next time, thanks for being here, my friend. And by the way, he had to take a break. He had to take a break anyhow. He can't be outside in this kind of weather. It's too brutal out there.
It's too cold. Too cold.
Anyway, he's Temple Rhodes. I'm Damian Mason. This is Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve. Thanks for being here.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cutting the Curve. Make sure to check out XtremeAg.farm for more great content to help you squeeze more profit out of your farming operation.